We'll certainly be able to use this for something. This marriage speech is destined, above all, for Jones's grandchildren. Not very romantic for the bride or for Colio. Long live the old-fashioned methods. Marco and Christina came directly to the island after their break in Moscow. I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
You want my fingerprints, Jack? It's amusing, but it's also very messy, Jack.
Thanks. At present, no more laughing. I am the representative of judicial authority on this island, and I have a murder on my hands. Sorry, but I understand nothing about architecture. I would like to have some things in this sketchbook explained.
Jack, in my view, you should ask Lorenzo. He is the only one who can answer you.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
One way or another, Jones is dead, Jack. For me, it changes nothing. For little Baena, it's different, of course. She is less guilty than before.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I played poker with Billy and Martin all evening. Then I left to go to sleep and found Marco already asleep. It must have been between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. Sonia was very hostile to me because she didn't like seeing me playing and chatting with Martin. At one point, she went out to calm down.
If the heirs had thought of inheriting, it seems they're off to a rather rocky start. What do you think?
This man detested me, Jack, and I didn't love him either. He wanted me to leave. Marco didn't want to leave me, so Walter Jones made him pay. There, you have it all.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
Ask Marco. He knows better than me. It's his family's affair. You understand.
I get the impression that Walter Jones didn't particularly appreciate you. Am I mistaken?
I'll tell you a story, Jack. One evening in Houston, as I was leaving the movie theater, I was attacked by a man. He hit me and slashed my face. It was one of Walter Jones's hitmen, I am sure of it. The guy said, "Go away, you dirty communist slut. Go back home to Russia. It's the last warning. You understand that, you bitch? Next time you'll be dead." And he stuck his knife into my cheek. Of course, it was the old goat Jones who wanted to intimidate me, to force me to leave Marco. He thought that it would injure his political career if I was seen around him.
If I may permit myself, Christina, I believe that Jones was unfair to you. Do you believe that you can get your hands on at least a small piece of the estate now that he's dead?
I am not an heir. And then, Marco and I, we are not yet married. If you know of a formula that will allow me to have this old jerk's money, then you have to let me know right away, Jack.
Sorry, I don't know. Do you think Walter Jones's fears about you were justified, miss?
Maybe. I don't know, Jack. There are people who like me and others who don't. But Marco was ready to leave politics because of his love for me. He told me this often.
Christina, this page from Jones's diary about the assault on you seems totally like a confession to me. What do you think?
Of course it doesn't surprise me. Walter Jones didn't have the courage to do the dirty work himself. I was beaten and given a death threat by a hired hand because the son of a bitch wanted to force me to leave Marco because he's a Republican candidate and I wasn't a woman suited to a future senator. Jack, life was not always easy for me. When I lived in Russia, it was sometimes really hard. So it doesn't really frighten me to have the blade of a knife pointed at me, understand? I would have loved to kill this pig of a Jones myself. Yes, I regret it.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
I don't know, Jack. Really.
In our times, it's wise to go out with men who use precaution. Who is the last man who had the honor of using this prophylactic in the tower?
It's my private life, Jack. And moreover, condoms are not a misdemeanor, I think. Quite to the contrary.
Sonia said that you are a tease.
Sonia thinks that I want to steal her husband, but it is he who sweet-talks me, Jack. I'm not to blame.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I don't know, Jack.
Do you know how to use a rifle?
No, of course not. I don't like all this stuff, Jack.
Do you know who in this tower knows how to use a gun?
No, I can't help you, Jack.
Did you see anyone in the library the evening of the murder?
Oh, Jack. Marco and I were very busy. You understand what I'm trying to say, don't you? Our room doesn't have a view on the library, so in any case we would not have noticed anyone there.
Okay. I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
My fingerprints? Because you seriously think I'm a murderer, Inspector?
Thanks. Henceforth, I have a mandate and I represent the law. So no more evasive responses. Sorry, but I understand nothing about architecture. I would like to have some things in this sketchbook explained.
I don't know anything about it, Inspector. Ask the architect. In my view, he's the only one who can enlighten you.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baina has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
I don't know, Baina, but I have a good instinct about these people. And frankly, I don't see her scheming something so horrific. But I am a little lost with all this, Inspector.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I was at the restaurant from 9:45 p.m. to 11 p.m. I cleared the table with Sonia, I washed the dishes, and cleaned up. If you must know, I'm fed up with being their maid. I had a fight with Billy because he was playing poker. It's crazy. He keeps on playing as if he didn't kick up enough trouble in my life and in my father's, too, with his gambling debts. It drives me nuts, but he just doesn't listen. After that, the maid prepared food for the next day. That was my evening, Inspector.
With regard to Walter Jones, everyone plays the victim. But some people didn't refrain from trying to make him fall from his perch.
I won't pretend to be indignant with you, Inspector. Jones did everything he could to push his grandchildren down this route. He deserved it, that old shark. Believe me.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
You ought to speak to Billy, Inspector. I don't get mixed up with the family affairs of my husband.
What is the connection between Walter Jones and your father's consulting firm?
You're certainly well informed, Inspector. Walter Jones is responsible for the collapse of my father's consulting firm. The jerk didn't want to help Billy, who was in danger of being finished off by the Russian mafia because of some gambling debts. The old man wouldn't lift a finger, and it was my father who absorbed Billy's debts. He did it for me, of course, but he counted on Billy repaying him in the shortest possible time. Well, obviously, Billy wasn't able to reimburse him. That put my father's business in difficulty. The poor man had a heart attack, and in fact, he almost died, you know. He's still not out of that mess. And guess what? The Jones Company is in line to buy my father's firm. I dreamed of strangling Jones, Inspector. Yes, I really dreamed it.
I get the impression that Walter Jones was not very affectionate with you.
Walter Jones knew that my father's health was poor after the payment of his consulting office was stopped, and he didn't do anything about it. Even though he was a self-made man just like my father, he could have tried to understand that for my father all would be lost, especially because this was all because of Billy, Inspector. Yes, Jones was a monster, a cruel and heartless man.
All this seems to indicate that Billy got himself in a real soup, and his family with him. What do you think?
It is, above all, Walter Jones who got us into that soup, Inspector. That old jackal was in no position to give lessons in morality, believe me. It was he who never wanted to absorb the debts of my husband. Walter Jones, one of the richest men in the world, didn't let go of a cent for his grandson.
I didn't think Jones was such a jerk. And his accomplice, Nolan, doesn't seem to be much better.
As far as I'm concerned, Walter Jones can burn in hell, Inspector. And Nolan deserves no better. He's the one who advised his boss to let my father's consulting firm collapse to pieces so that they could buy it at a throwaway price.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
This is a man's chain. It reminds me of something, but I really don't know what.
Why do some people here compare you to Anna Jones, Walter Jones's deceased wife?
To tell you the truth, I didn't know her, but it seems that she was a very gentle woman. How opposites attract. I say this, but I didn't know Walter Jones before he lost his wife. Maybe he was more hospitable back then.
If Nolan is to be believed, the young Baina literally cast a spell on Walter Jones. What do you know about this?
I swear that, strictly speaking, I know nothing, Inspector. How could I?
What do you think of Christina?
I like my brother-in-law, but between us, Inspector, don't you think it's a little strange that Marco would be with this woman? It's an indiscreet relationship.
What can you tell me about Marco?
I like Marco, and I respect his choices. If he's happy with Christina after all, it's good.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I don't remember at all, Inspector.
Do you know how to use a rifle?
No, I don't know how to use a weapon. I don't even know how it works, you understand? It's not my thing, Inspector, that's all.
Do you know who in this tower knows how to use a gun?
No idea. Certainly not Billy. He doesn't know how to do anything with his 10 fingers. You can believe me on that, Inspector.
Did you see anyone in the library the evening of the murder?
I certainly must have already told you that I was playing at being a maid in the kitchen at that time.
I get it. Well, all this is very touching.
Correct match.
The ocean has covered the whole island. I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
Good. Well done, man. What do you want me to say?
Thanks. At present, no more laughing. I am the representative of judicial authority on this island, and I have a murder on my hands. This document seems to incriminate Noland. I'm wondering if you know something that is liable to contradict it?
I never liked this Nolan fellow, but now it's for a good reason. It seems pretty damning, Inspector.
This transfer of shares fully reimburses Walter Jones for the embezzlement of funds by Hubert de Noland, doesn't it?
Wow, Norm. If you ask me, With this, Mr. Hubert de Noland seems pretty much in hot water.
Sorry, but I understand nothing about architecture. I would like to have some things in this sketchbook explained.
It's best to ask the architect, don't you think, Norm? After all, he's the person in charge of the problem. He's the one who can inform you.
What did Walter Jones tell you regarding his estate?
The old miser told us we were going to inherit his empire, the Jones Company. I wasn't expecting it at all, and I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't thrilled.
I heard that there's a chapel somewhere. Do you know where it is?
I don't know anything about it. Like you, I knew of its existence from reading my grandfather's speech, but it didn't say where it could be found.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
What are you saying? They shot the old man? Wow, we're swimming in a real crime novel now, Norm. And I bet you're going to conduct an investigation and unmask the guilty party, right?
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I played poker with Martin and Christina between 9:45 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. And of course, I had a row with my wife, who made a scene because of it. She hates the game. I asked myself how I can still tolerate her. Sonia and Martin, they fought over something petty. I can't remember what it was. In any case, Sonia was really tense. She left to calm down a little. And it was her, I stress it was her, who came back for our grandfather. She was beside herself with worry that he should be out in such horrible weather. We discussed it and said that we better check out where the old guy was. It was 11:30 p.m., and it was then that Nolan burst into the room telling us that our grandfather was dead.
With regard to Walter Jones, everyone plays the victim. But some people didn't refrain from trying to make him fall from his perch.
Oh, you know I didn't take part in this thing wholeheartedly. Sonia and Martin had their reasons, and I had mine.
Well, if you had thought you would inherit, it seems to me that this is in a little danger.
Helping for grandfather's estate is like betting on a bad hand. One has little chance of winning. I'm a gambler. I counted on it anyway. I shouldn't have.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
Well, it was our only chance to recoup our grandfather's estate. Well, as I said, my grandfather brought Sonia and me together in his office to sign this paper. He made an impossibly huge fuss about how he had fired all his staff and how it was a call for help. He wanted us to take care of him and pamper him. Us, his cherished grandchildren. See what kind of guy he is? We asked to see his will, but what do you think? What play acting when I think back. He was a big bluffer, the old man. He wouldn't have been bad at poker.
Ah, well, Billy, I had this impression that you shook a stick at a beehive, and that you dragged your family into this murky business.
Well, it's true, I confess. I made a real mess of things. And then after all, it doesn't surprise me that my miserly grandfather hated me to the end. Nevertheless, I trusted him. I thought he was going to help me out, or that his estate would help me later. And then the old jerk didn't lift his little finger when Grigory Pavliev, the insane mafia don, contracted someone to deliver my head. You're from the police. You have to get me out of this situation, Norm. Otherwise, I'm a dead man.
Walter Jones was not fond of Clara.
I dragged a lot of people I love into hot water. Gambling, drugs, all that. I know. My grandfather was pitiless towards me. He never gave a single cent to save me from misery. But still, he could have spared my wife and my father-in-law. But that's the way it is. I'm a good-for-nothing, And Walter Jones was the worst of sharks.
I didn't think Jones was such a jerk. And his accomplice, Nolan, doesn't seem to be much better.
Inspector, I know that my father-in-law has some major health issue, and that it's all my fault. My wife is angry at me. It's to be expected. But Walter Jones could have arranged everything just by lifting his little finger. He preferred to take advantage of the situation by preying on my father-in-law's business. He's the king of jerks, and his acolyte is more or less the same, Norm.
Why did Walter Jones talk about Sonia's desire for revenge?
The truth is that Sonia is the bravest of us all. She really has courage, if you see what I'm trying to say. The grandfather always knew this. He was afraid of her and respected her. Sonia didn't fall for it. She was the only one who fought back. You understand?
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
Well done, Inspector. That's the chain.
This family photo is very touching. I imagine that you learned to shoot because you have a gun in your hands?
Oh yeah, I remember. Sometimes it was really fun. I was a kid, and the lions and the elephants and all that, it suited me fine. But hunting? No. Really not my thing. You had to walk for hours and hours to finally come face to face with a beast that wanted nothing to do with you. My grandfather took me for a moron because I was no good at it.
I'm told that an accident left Baina mute. What is that about?
A dark family story, Jack. My grandfather never wanted to tell us what happened between him and Baina that day. What is sure is that both of them fell from the top of the rocks. Since then, the old man was in a wheelchair, and the island bird didn't say another word. In my opinion, it was a love story that turned bitter.
It seems that you have financial problems, Billy.
No, some small gambling debts, basically.
I was told that you are a gambling addict of sorts.
It's not a secret for anyone. Gambling is stronger than I am.
If Nolan is to be believed, the young Baina literally cast a spell on Walter Jones. What do you know about this?
I don't know anything about it at all. With Grandfather, I didn't speak about most things, and certainly not about sex.
Marco says that your childish irresponsibility is painful for your family. What is he talking about?
I love my brother, but he ought to mind his own business. It's true that I owe some money to my wife's father, but that doesn't concern him. I've never asked anything of my brothers and sisters.
What do you think of Christina?
I don't know Christina well, but when this woman walks into a room, you can feel the general level of adrenaline rise, that's for sure.
What can you tell me about Marco?
Marco, he was always Grandfather's pet. Even when we were children, he was the favorite. And the old man helped him hugely in his political success.
What can you tell me about Clara?
Without Clara, I'd be utterly lost. Clara's a saint, dude. And the truth is that I don't deserve her. In fact, this girl is too good for me.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I didn't pay a lot of attention, but I remember that my grandfather always wore a small chain. Ever since he built this tower, I always saw him wearing a chain. Of that, I'm sure.
Do you know who in this tower knows how to use a gun?
On that point, Inspector, I haven't got the foggiest.
Did you see anyone in the library the evening of the murder?
Listen, I already told you everything about this. In the end, Inspector, your questions are exhausting.
I understand.